All right, hello and welcome to the Let's Talk About It, a podcast created by the Fuse, an outreach initiative within the College of Applied Studies and recorded on campus at the Illett School of Communication here at Wichita State University. I'm Bobby Berry.
And I'm Jessica Newman. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing policing, both on campus and also how that impacts the greater Wichita community. Now, when we talk about policing, we're talking specifically about the process in which police maintain public order and safety and enforce the law and prevent, detect, and investigate criminal activities. But we obviously want to go far beyond that basic definition. That's a little bit sterile. So our hope today is to become more familiar with the people who are policing our campus and our community and just talk to them about the issues that matter most in our society today.
Our first guests joining us today are Chief Rodney Clark and Officers Brandon Dury and Alba Morales. So once again, thank you guys for joining us at the talk today.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so just kick it off.
All right, so can each of you first just tell us maybe how long you've been a police officer, and then what drew you to this profession? And let's start with you.
With me?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I pointed, but we're a podcast, so, okay, Chief Clark.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Chief Clark. My first name is Rodney, and I guess I have a little bit more of not a unique, but a different experience. What first drew me to policing, I was in the military for 22 years, and I was military police since 1995 is when I joined the military. Like many young people starting out at community college level, I took some criminal justice classes in the mid to early 90s, and I had an interest in being a police officer. And I also had an interest in being in the military, so I kind of got the best of both worlds, started in 1995. I worked various assignments around the United States and around the world, and then I retired in 2018, and that's what brought me here to this job.
Great, wonderful.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know that.
What about you, Officer Morales?
I've been an police officer for 4 years. I kind of going to high school, growing up in a small town, Colorado, I kind of was always into trying to do police work whenever I grew up. I wanted to join the military, but my parents weren't really fans of that. They come from Mexico, Spanish speaking only. So once I kind of was able to make my decision, I went to college, got my associates in criminal justice, and then I worked at Wesley Security for a while, and that's kind of what got me even closer to, I want to do more outside of this. And then I got my bachelor's in business management, a little different, but then came here, applied, and I've been here WSU PD for 4 years now.
Nice.
Excellent. Yeah. Officer Dorian?
Well, I've been here for about 5 years now. What kind of drew me into law enforcement was, some people will kind of say it's like a calling, this inner drive and motivation to go out and help others. And that was really big to me, and not just necessarily helping others, but being able to be in a position to where somebody could call me in any type of emergency or need of assistance. That was something that gravitated me towards that. This kind of, I guess, more solidified when I was in high school, and I had a choice to make. I ran track and field and cross country in high school, and I came to the determination: do I want to focus on my studies, as far as criminal justice and going down the path of being a police officer, or do I want to focus on my running? And ultimately, I made the decision to not pursue running in college, and rather attend Wichita State University and obtain my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And then when I was 22, I got hired on here, so it feels like forever ago and not forever ago at the same time.
Right.
And then while I've been here, I was also obtained my master's degree in criminal justice. So really just this overall sense of wanting to be the person in a position to help somebody in any type of situation or time of need. It really allowed me to really go down that path. And it's not an office job, it's not a 9 to 5.
Right.
And it's something that I really enjoy, and the people that I work with are fantastic, and even the community members. It's just something that, I don't take for granted, so.
That's great. So just as kind of a starter question, something that I don't know, so my guess is probably our listeners don't know it either. I'm going to direct this towards you, Chief Clark, because it's kind of a logistical question. So you all work for Wichita State University. Now, I do know, and I've heard that the training and everything is the same. You guys are police officers just the same as Wichita police officers. So can you tell me what is the difference between campus police versus Wichita police? Is there any crossover? What's the difference there?
Yeah, good question. Let me see if I can follow it all. Starting with as far as all police officers, that is a point that I like to stress as much as we can. We are certified police officers just the same as any other police officer in the state of Kansas. We go through the same training. All of the officers do. You use a term called sworn or non-sworn personnel in law enforcement. And the sworn personnel means you swear your oath and become a police officer. As far as the differences, there is a difference between being a campus police officer versus being a city police officer. We are employees for the university, much like a lot of other people here in the university. As far as the crossover, of course, our primary jurisdiction would be the campus proper of Wichita State University. But in Kansas and many other states, there's something that's called mutual aid, that if another police agency that's adjacent to you requests for your assistance, you're more than welcome, or you're legally authorized to give that assistance. And that's where we find ourselves a lot. We are in the north sector of the Wichita Police jurisdiction, if you will. It's pretty simple. Wichita is divided up into north, south, east, and west sectors.
Oh, that is easy.
We fall in the north sector. So many times in the surrounding areas, if they need help or backup, any kind of emergency situation, they'll put a call out, and any police officer in that area can kind of respond to someone else's area. It's the same thing for all the smaller towns around, like, Keachai, Park City, things like that. They all come to each other's aid in the city and county, when necessary.
Okay.
So those are kind of, we are all police officers the same, but we just work for different departments and we have different areas of responsibilities.
Gotcha. So you guys are kind of like a suburb of Wichita in the same way that like Keachai, you're just kind of another area. Like
Yeah,
another
really.
City.
Interesting fact, we are the number 4 largest police department in Sedgwick County.
Really?
You might not think of that, but so of course you've got, the sheriff's department and the city police department. And we have 30 officers right now, and that beats out a lot of other places like Park City, Keachai, Mays. You think about all those other cities. I think Derby might be the one that's higher than us, like in the number 3 spot.
Wow.
But don't quote me on that. But we are, number 4. So we do hold our own with the number of police officers. But that is, we have to provide 24-hour day coverage. There's 3
Right.
shifts a day, right? Morning, your mid shift, and then your evening shift. So that requires a rotation of officers, and just because you have 30, that takes into account myself, 2 administrative captains, and then a detective. So when you minus that out, there's 26 officers. Not all of those are prepared for duty at one point in time, because you still have injuries,
Sure.
you have time off, you have people on FMLA, all the other things that university personnel would deal with. So that kind of ties into what's your prepared for duty rate. I might have 26 on the books, but maybe only 21 of those are ready to fill into those slots, during the week. So it becomes kind of challenging with manning sometimes, having
bet.
at least like 2 officers, out on the road, or
Yeah,
things
well,
of that nature.
That provides a lot of clarity just
Yeah.
as kind of a basis of our conversation. So thank you for that.
Wow,
Sure.
that was really interesting.
Yeah.
So thinking about policing and police officers, you guys have been under a lot of scrutiny regarding racial tensions in our country. And so thinking about the summer of 2020 specifically, how did this last summer impact each of you personally? So Chief Clark, I'm going to start with you.
How did it impact me personally?
Yeah.
I think just like anybody else, I see everything, that goes on, and I have, my own thoughts and emotions and things like that. It's hard sometimes. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. When you turn on the TV every day and, there seems to be like a large amount of people that are against what you do.
Right.
And that runs from the spectrum of there's people out there that would like to kill you.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they make public statements about that. That they hate you. It's hard. It's hard sometimes to deal with that and process that. And even for a guy like me that's been doing it, since the mid-90s, military and law enforcement, although that's an interesting juxtaposition because most people in the country would favor military, and some people favor law enforcement, but there's definitely an anti-law enforcement sentiment out there. And of course, police officers come from multiracial,
Right.
conditions as well. It's
Right.
not only white officers, so you have Black and Hispanic, and even on our force here, we have LGBT, officers and things like that. So we kind of run the spectrum. But it is difficult personally when you see that all the time. It's you can feel like a sense of stress,
Yeah.
like you're being aggressed against,
Right.
and I know just getting gas or something like that, you're kind of always, police officers are kind of in a hyper-vigilant state all the time
Right.
anyways,
I
but
bet.
definitely during heightened conditions, it makes you think about it even more. And we experienced some of that right here in Wichita, although we're not the epicenter,
Right.
like Minneapolis last year, where some bad things happened. But even in Wichita, we dealt with our own, I would call it, an unlawful assembly, or if you want to call it a riot, where people get out of hand and fire weapons and throw objects at police officers. Some of our officers dealt with that, helping Wichita during that time. So that's my, it does affect you. It does make you feel like a certain way. And police officers is one of those professions that is, I always say nobody, I don't think anyways, I'm not aware of anything, that everyone has an opinion on how you ought to do your job.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people have done it, that have that opinion, but there's a vast majority of people that have never done it, but it doesn't stop them from telling you what they think ought to be done, and that can wear on you sometimes.
Yeah.
And Officer Morales, how has that impacted you over the last year?
I think I'm kind of going to go with what Chief said. I think that it affects us personally. At home, it's you kind of have a second thought, like, do I want to keep doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to me, especially right now, being in law enforcement, you have to love what you do.
Right.
You can't be doing this for the money, for the benefits. That was my thought, especially last year. That hit home because things like what Chief mentioned happened here in Wichita. So, and it can't be like, oh, well, I don't work for the city, I don't have to put up with that.
Right.
You can't have that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I worked here, I've loved it. I enjoy what I do as well. But at the same time, like he said, going out to get gas in uniform in a patrol car, like, you always have to be watching your six, like they say. You got to watch your back, and you got to watch each other's back.
Yeah. I can only imagine what that feels like. And I think that was one of the reasons why we wanted all of you on, because I feel like perspective is everything. And I think oftentimes, and especially over the last year plus, stigmas and painting people with broad brushes, right? And not realizing that one person's experiences is not the same for everyone, and especially one person's actions does not speak for everyone.
Right.
So that was really important for us. So, Brendan, how about you? How has the last year impacted you?
Yeah, last summer was it was pretty stressful. Like Chief Clark said, waking up and turning on the news every day, and seeing, the events that unfolded, in the nation. It raised the temperature with a lot of people, and there was just a lot of tension going on. And, the biggest thing for me is, I love to work at building our relationships, and love talking to people, and love, showing them that, the perceptions of police officers aren't always what you may have, and you can change perceptions of people. And that's really something that I like to do. And so I felt like when everything happened, a lot of the trust and a lot of the partnerships that we were building, not only with organizations but with individuals, it kind of faltered a little bit. And it hurt to see, because over the last 5 years I've dedicated so much time, and our department has dedicated so much time to building relationships that branch out beyond our campus rather than just here. And day in and day out, one of my focuses is just reaching as many people as I can, and maintaining those relationships, and showing them, like, I can come down and I can sit down with you and just talk about your day. We don't have to, meet on a car stop. We don't have to meet, in a bad situation, just meeting in your own forum. And I feel like there was a lot of distance that was created there. And, it was just difficult, because I felt like all the work that myself and the department have done in the last 5 years, it felt like it was automatically gone.
Right.
And on a personal aspect, that hit home with me, because I absolutely love coming here and doing what I do, but it was even more heartbreaking to know that people had these views of us as a whole, rather than just individuals who were involved in these incidents and stuff. So we got put in the same category
Right.
as all those, and I can't sit here and tell you that was easy, because it wasn't.
Yeah.
And watching the news every day and seeing people with the signs saying, death to all police officers and stuff, like, if anybody's known me here or been on a ride along with me or even had a little bit of time to talk to me, I would hope that their perception of me would be different.
Right.
And Officer Morales and Chief and anybody that worked for our department. And so, but what I learned from this is there's discussions that need to be held,
Right.
and we need to be able to sit at the same table and open platforms of communication and discuss real issues.
Right.
Both sides need to be heard.
Right.
That's very important. It's very critical. So it was tough to live that every day, and our families saw that and would talk to us about that. But as you can see here, we stuck through, and we're so dedicated to serving this community. And I think that shows, we're still here. We're still ready to serve our community, and that's why we're here.
And that kind of leads me to my next question. So thinking about the intersectionality of being a police officer and still being a person, right?
Yeah.
So you guys go home, you have families, you have lives to live as well. So the back and forth of I'm an officer, right? Because that is who you are in your being. But then at the same token, you have children, you have spouses, you have partners. And so thinking about how challenging is it to go back and forth of, having on that uniform and then going home and not having on that uniform and still feeling like you can separate the two, but not really? I mean, is that part challenging as well? And Officer Morales, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Well, I think, like you said, like being a police officer is kind of like a 24/7 job. I mean, I don't know. I go home out of my uniform, but then things happen, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what the heck,
Right.
Like, almost to the point where I feel like if I was at work, like, I'd be going to that call, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or sometimes I'll take my radio with me just from like the department to my house, and I listen to it, and then I get home and I'm like, I can still listen, I can still hear it in my ear, and I don't have it with me anymore. But I don't know, it's just, you have to kind of find a way of not taking work home
Yeah.
and trying to separate and spending time with your family or doing something that you like to do to be mentally prepared to come back to work.
Right. What about you, Brandon? How what is that like, that on off switch, or is there one?
It takes some crafting. For me, I feel like it comes pretty easy because I have a mental. When I come to work, I'm so focused on work. I'm not focused on anything else. When I go home, I basically associate my uniform with work. So once the uniform comes off, I'm able to slip back into my own skin, and that's not an easy task for people. And there's a lot of officers that struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fortunate enough that I feel like I do a pretty good job with that, and I leave the work stresses at work, and in my uniform room where I put my uniform, it stays there. It's almost a different. It's I don't want to say it's a costume, but it's when I put on the uniform, it's a mentality. I switch the mentality to work, to focusing on work-related things. And when I'm in my plain clothes like I am now, I can focus on being Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
When I come to work, I have to focus on the mission and the role that I have to do here. But that role can sometimes feel mentally like it's 24/7. But I just have that ability to, for the most part, be able to, once I take that uniform off, I can be Brandon, and I can be home, I can be, a husband, I can be, a brother, a friend, and I try to limit work discussions in my personal life. When I'm off for the weekends, typically, that's my time, and it's not easy to do for a lot of officers. A lot of officers struggle with that, and it can affect their personal lives.
Right.
I know that I have an obligation to my friends in my personal life to be who I'm supposed to be, rather than always in this work mode and mind. So it is difficult, and it's a real thing. So it just takes time.
Yeah.
It's not an easy task to do.
And I think so Chief Clark, I mean, you've been doing this for quite some time. So do you feel like you've kind of mastered that, or do you?
And military prep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
No,
similar thing.
I don't feel like I've mastered it, and I'm glad to hear Brandon say that, and because it gives me relief that somebody can. For me, I can never take it off. I can never escape it. It's always there. It's always pervasive. I think somewhat that has to do with me being the chief as well. And in the military, I was an officer, a commander. So you're always responsible. I'm always responsible for what those other 29 officers are doing. And I know that if one of them, I don't want to put the extra stress on them, but I realize if one of them makes a mistake or goes too far or something like that, that's going to have repercussions on me as well. So it's hard for me to take it off. I do feel the weight of it is always there, no matter what. I wish sometimes that I didn't, but whether I'm like on a road trip with my family, it's always there when I go into a gas station. And that's a little bit of something that some officers struggle with, is the inability to get out of it. To get out of the hypervigilance, to just struggle with things sometimes. It's a pervasive attitude. I encourage, and I'm glad to hear like some of the young officers can do it. For me, in my personal experience, I can't ever get away from it. It's always there if I'm mowing the lawn. Not that I'm afraid that somebody's going to run out and get me mowing the lawn, but I'm thinking about things at the department, like what do I need to do different? I wonder, who's on shift today, who's the sergeant today.
Yeah.
And I think some of that, going back into military training as well and being a military officer, just like you can't take that off.
Right.
You might take your uniform off, but it's really like still on.
And you're always seen as that. So even
Right.
even when you are at the store and people are like, there's Chief, so it's even in that
Yeah.
time where other folks probably don't allow you the opportunity and space to not have it on,
Yeah.
because there's an expectation.
Yeah.
If something goes crazy at a gas station, they're
Right.
going to look
You're
at you
the
like,
chief, yeah.
you're the chief, like,
Yeah,
what you
yeah.
going to do?
Or
You
you'll
know?
feel an obligation to
Right.
do something even when you're off duty.
Yeah.
I carry my weapon off duty, like on road trips and things like that. So you feel like if something goes down, that you're
Right.
supposed to be that
Right.
person.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
no matter what you're doing, you're kind of obligated by the law to do something.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah.
Was do you have a legal obligation as an off-duty
Well,
cop to respond?
If
Or-
you
I don't know how
witness
that
certain
works.
things, like somebody holding up a store, I mean, you kind of do have a duty to do something about it if you're able to. Now, you're not
Gotcha.
wearing all of your equipment like you would when you're an officer, but
Right.
you couldn't idly stand by and not do anything. Like, you should try to do what you could
Gotcha.
and
Gotcha.
to make the situation better.
That
But
makes
yeah,
sense.
it does, going back to it becomes part of your identity. At least it does for me. And I think the longer you go, the harder it is to separate that from your identity. And it can be a burden, but then there's pride in it at the same time.
Right.
So I try and look at the positive things of it. There's pride in it at the same time. So
Well, and I think that adds some context too to your guys' responses about how the summer of 2020 impacted you. And I say the summer of 2020, but obviously these kind of tensions have been going on for a long time. But when people attack your profession, they're attacking your identity, and that and so it adds some context to that. So a big part of what you all do is to keep our campus safe and secure, and a big part of that, excuse me, is building trust and rapport. And so I'm curious to know what types of things you all do on campus to help build that trust. And Officer Dorian, I'd love to start with you because I know you kind of mentioned how that's a big passion of yours. So can you guys tell us just about some of the initiatives that we have?
Definitely. So one of the main focuses of our department is building those community and not only building them but maintaining them. Okay, it's a two-part type of deal. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of opportunities for us to engage our student body. The call load that we have on our university is not significantly high enough to where we're going call to call to call. So we have a lot of downtime, and really maximizing our productivity during that downtime is a critical part of what we do. There's a lot of student activities here, a lot of I would say definitely the student activities and the student events is really our opportunity to really join them and engage that student body. For instance, if there's a game night somewhere, or if there's basketball games going on at the Heskett Center, whatever it may be, we're looking for innovative ways to engage the student body in their atmosphere. So like, for instance, if we go to, an SAC event or something like that, they can see us and we allow them that opportunity to engage with us outside of our normal duties. My big thing is not every interaction has to happen in our work of duty, whereas a car stop or a call or things like that. And if we can maximize our abilities to engage them and build that trust through those contexts, that's going to help us in every sense that we have here as far as our overall mission and our goals. Like I said earlier, building that trust is huge for us. I almost think of it as kind of like this trust bank. When we keep coming that we have that face-to-face contact, and we can continue to show each other, sides of us, and building that type of trust with each other is critical in making sure that we're maintaining those partnerships down the road. Because, if something like, the summer of 2020 happens, their perception of us may be a little bit different, rather than putting us, in that category of those police officers who are in the national spotlight,
Right.
And so when we're able to build those relationships and maintain them, it all deals with that perception and saying, you know what, I see this stuff going on, but maybe in the back of their head they're thinking, but I know Chief Clark, I know Officer Morales, I know, Officer Dorian, and I know that they're not like that. And if we can do that on a department-wide deal, if we can maintain those relationships and maintain the trust that we can with each other here, that's helping us achieve our overall goals. So that is one of the core functions of our department. Outside of our responding to normal duties, that's a very critical part of our operations here, and that's a strong value that we have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you two would add to that? Did Officer Dorian kind of cover most of it?
Yeah, I think that he did a great job of covering most of it, and Officer Dorian's probably one of our most strongest. Everybody is, but he really goes the extra effort to do that. And community policing is an old term. It came up probably when I first started being familiar with it. When you study criminal justice, was in the 1980s, is kind of a newer way of doing things. I try to put a spin on it here. I use the like the letter C and then the number 2. C2 stands for caring and compassionate policing. So C
I like
squared.
that.
And I try and impress upon the officers to be empathetic. We do work at a university. Policing at a university is different than policing in the city. You're having a kind of a group of people that are going towards a common goal. You can just live wherever. There's no rules just
Sure.
because you live in Wichita, and you got people that are scattered. Kind of like a group of people that's at a traffic stop is just a loose group of people. They have no commonalities. People in university have commonalities, and when you police a group like that, it is different. So I very much appreciate the community aspect of it, and just being there day to day. The longer, where you can kind of be there and people can go about their day-to-day business, and you can kind of be sometimes in the forefront, but a lot of times in the background, where people know you're there and they feel that calming presence. I mean, I think that's what I would probably strive for the most.
Absolutely. So in talking about training, you all do all sorts of different trainings and classes and things like that. Could you tell, Chief Clark, you're probably the best to address this one, what types of specifically diversity-related trainings or practices or whatever do you all have?
Well, actually, as far as diversity training or, diversity, bias-free policing is what they call it now.
Oh, okay.
Everybody in the state of Kansas is required to go through that type of training.
Oh, gotcha.
And a lot more scenarios are set up that way now. It's not like it used to be. You never can pretend to be somebody else because, like I couldn't say what I know what it's like to be a black man because I've never been a black man. But you try as close as you can to understand like others' experiences and understand that there are bad things that exist, like in everybody, right? And sometimes there's bad actors that get their way into police work, just like there's bad actors that get their way into any other profession. But it is I've definitely seen within the last 10 years, I'd say within the 5 years, it's become because of things that are going on in America and society, more like of a focus, right, to do that, we call it bias-free policing, or to understand how some communities might look at police And we've talked about that before, about how you might approach a situation differently. At the end of the day, you still got to do a job. And a lot of our actions are based on other people's actions, right?
Right.
Like, if somebody pulls a gun out, it doesn't matter, the color or whatever. You can't treat that situation differently. You have to do what you have to do. But those are very rare circumstances. Most police officers will go through their whole career and never draw their weapon. You're ready for it in case you do, but you have to be ready for those other circumstances and talking to people, how you relate to people. It's harder for me. I'm 46 years old now, so I remember going to college and I remember being college age, but it's harder too to think about how the next generation thinks differently.
Sure.
We didn't have all this technology, even 25 years ago, like we didn't have all this technology. So I really think it shapes people's minds and experiences and things like that.
That kind of makes me think, based off of what you said, Chief Clark, you stated your age, right? So,
Yes, I did.
so Brandon, I'm curious as well. When Chief Clark made that statement, and it's you as well, Alba, the fact that you guys are younger, right? Do you feel like your age influences the way in which you do your job? Do you feel like you think about things differently? Do you feel like you, and even maybe your experience being Hispanic, do you feel like your lens impacts how you view what you do every single day? Is there any difference there for you, do you think?
I mean, I'm sure there probably is,
Yeah.
just because, like you say, I was born in Mexico, raised in small town Colorado, where my parents were kind of against the police. They've never really had anything traumatic for them to have that mindset, but it was just one of those things,
Yeah.
because they weren't around it. And so whenever I told them that I was going to become a police officer, they were kind of like, no, we really don't like that idea. Why not? Like, it's just something so, like, obviously because I love what I do, but at the same time, like, that gives them a different point of view.
Yeah.
Like a different thought of police officers because now I am a police officer.
Right.
So I'm sure, like, I assist WPD on translations. Sometimes they'll call to see if I can go out to calls with them and assist them with that. And I really enjoy doing that because sometimes the people that call to make a report have they're scared because there's an officer that doesn't speak their language. So when I arrive on scene and I present myself and then we start talking, like, their demeanor completely changes. So I really like doing that just because I can help the community like that, and I can help assist WPD as far as being able to communicate with them and just watching how people, like, they look scared, and then I get there and then we start talking and, like, you can just almost see it.
Yeah.
The same thing with traffic stops. Like, whenever other officers here do traffic stops and the driver doesn't speak English, Spanish speaking, I go, and as soon as, like, I start talking to them, like, their demeanor changes.
Yeah.
So I think it might have a different way. I might do things a different way, but not just because of where I was come
Right.
from, the way I was raised, being bilingual.
Yeah. Interesting. What about you, Brandon? Do you feel like your age and that identity that you carry, do you feel like that impacts the way you approach being an officer?
Yeah, the community that we serve here is typically, the student population here is usually between the age of 18 to 24 range, and sometimes obviously we have students who are older than that. When I started here, I was 22, and I looked like a student, and I still was a student, and I think that related to a lot of students because if you think of if you close your eyes and you thought back of imagine a police officer, I probably wasn't that definition because I was so young,
Right.
and I think that resonated with a lot of people in a positive way because when we're talking about diversity, we want to be able to reflect the community that we're serving, and when we have officers who are still in college, who are college age, I feel like that was more relatable for students. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to stay young forever, but I know that we have the positive influence that has had. So, but I still, I'm a pretty humble person. You know, I really want to learn from the other officers, you know, that are older than me because they've been here for a lot longer. And then so really taking the strengths from both sides of being able to positively relate to the students, because I'm still a student myself now, so we can talk classes. We can talk about, you know, classes that we've had and things like that, and it just gives another platform for us to engage outside of my normal duties, you know. And so, you know, starting here young, I was passionate about it. You know, I still am, and I still feel like I carry on the mentality of a student. You know, and this is the great atmosphere to do that in. I also wanted to touch on you know, kind of a previous question that we talked on as far as you know, what we're doing to build the relationships and the trust and things like that. Is if you see here now, you don't see typical police uniforms.
Right.
And now Chief Clark, you know, he's in an administrative position to where he's not always wearing a uniform. But myself and Morales, we're in plain clothes, and this is also both of our days off. So we're coming in on our days off to you know, be on the podcast and join in on these discussions, because that means a lot for both of us. You know,
Yeah.
because we have, you know, 3 days off, and so you know, we wanted to give our time and say, even though this is on our day off, we wanted to come. We want to be a part of this. And if that, you know, if there's one thing that I would want somebody to take away from that, is that dedication of, you know, we're just not police officers that 9 to 5. We're willing to come in, even in our own plain clothes, to be a part of a bigger discussion and be a part of these events, and maybe, you know, we build some relationships here.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
I had that thought, and I wanted to add that in there. So
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last question, are you guys encouraged by, you know, these conversations that are going on and that we're having at a national level regarding policing in our country? So how do you guys feel about these conversations that are going on? I mean, your opinion on that, and then we'll start with you,
Yeah.
Brandon.
you know, being able to speak to each other is, and having that effective communication is critical. And I am you know, motivated you know, on the discussions that we're having on a national level. What I would like to see more here is us having that ability to talk to students. You know, we've done that with our department. There was an event that we did, it was some months back, but we worked with Dr. Kevin Harrison, and we had an open forum. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't too many that was attending there, and that might have been because of the pandemic and everything like that. But we did want to open up that ability for students in the community to ask us questions, and then we can ask questions back. You know, having that understanding of effective communication is critical. And we need to be able to listen to our community members, and we need to be able to listen to the things that we're doing well, the things that they'd like to see differently, and some concerns that they have. It's very important that we can all sit at the same table. And rather than just making somebody feel like they're at the same table, we need to be able that we're allowing that type of transparency and that procedural justice, you know. I've used that a lot, you know, speaking in terms of, you know, sitting at the same table, you know, like we are here now. We're able to talk to each other. We're able to ask each other questions and you know, communicate with each other. And that's really a big part of how we do our jobs. So I hope that we're able to continue to have, you know, those events and those opportunities on a larger scale, you know, specifically with our department, to be able to allow students and faculty and the university community to engage us in that way, because if we're not able to effectively communicate with each other, it's going to make our job a lot harder to serve the community. So I really value those types of talks and you know, that communication.
Yeah. What about you, Officer Morales?
I would kind of piggyback on what Brandon said. I think that having events like the one we had last year, and just having students, staff, whoever wants to attend, be able to be there. And last year I attended that event as well, and I was in plain clothes, and there was officers in uniform because they were, you know, on duty. But I think it's a cool thing to see that students, staff, and whoever wants to attend participates and asks the questions. And we all have a different, not answer, but like a different perspective.
Right.
Because we have totally different background.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd go on that. Like community policing, like Chief had mentioned earlier, is a big part of working for the university. And it's not just one officer's job, it's everybody's job. And now being able to communicate and, you know, sitting down at the same table, asking questions, getting answers, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And what about you, Chief Clark?
Could you go back to what the question
Yeah.
was? Did you say, am I encouraged? Or?
Yeah. How are you feeling about these conversations that we're having on a national level? Do you feel encouraged by the fact that there are even conversations going on?
Yeah, and thanks for repeating it.
Yeah.
I wanted to get I'm not encouraged by everything that I hear because
Right.
I'm not encouraged by everything that I hear. I still see a lot of divisiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear people talking at each other, wanting to get their side out without like really wanting to understand the other side. And politics is what it is. There's actually an interest in politics to keep people polarized, you know.
Yes,
Because then it keeps
absolutely.
people in two separate camps.
Right.
And I think that a lot of these questions, and I've repeated this before, some of these things aren't necessarily law enforcement issues. They're broader, like social and societal issues that law enforcement sometimes get thrust into the middle of. Remember, that's why it's called law enforcement. We don't make the laws, but we're expected to be on the business end of that, the side that other people aren't willing to step forward and be on the side of. And sometimes that makes for bad conditions, you know. I don't want to chase somebody down an alley with a gun at night. But if I have to, then I have to, because that's my job. If somebody's running and they've just committed a felony, I'm obligated to try and bring that person under control. But I'm definitely not encouraged by everything that I see. I'm encouraged by some things. I still believe that this country is the best country that there is. I think it affords opportunities. Having been in other countries and lived in other countries in the military, that really like affirms that belief. But we're not perfect, you know, and I realize that. There are some things to hold on to, but there's a lot that I see that's divisive too on both sides, you know. And that's what not to sound like doom and gloom, but I sometimes fear for the future. Will we be able to figure that out in time
Yeah.
to turn things around or to get something, or will the next 20 or 30 years be two sides that they're just going at each other all the time?
Right.
And
I'm
I don't know
actually-
what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you
Yeah.
that you went that direction, because I was
Yeah.
going to ask a follow-up question, and now I won't, because you basically said exactly what I was wondering. But, you know, I'm communication faculty here in the Elliott School, and so from a communication perspective, it's interesting that, you know, I said Dr. Dorian, Officer Dorian.
Someday,
you know,
someday,
each other. You know, you were talking about how important communication is, and as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, yeah, it's so important, but it's so divided right now. Everything is so polarized, and sometimes I wonder, you know, the conversations are important to have, but sometimes productive conversations are important to have, and not all the conversations we're hearing are. So, you know, like you said, not to be doom and gloom, but I'm encouraged that you kind of brought up that perspective, because it is an interesting dichotomy that some people like to talk.
Right,
says a
yeah.
podcast host here,
Right,
but
right.
yeah, but I appreciate that answer very much.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, talking about the, you know, what you kind of just piggybacking off what you just said, you know, one of the big things, you know, in having those conversations and everything is providing transparency.
Right.
And if we're able to, for instance, there's a question that I hear a lot about, you know, sometimes on campus and sometimes even around the city, most police departments, is there's usually 2 vehicles to a car stop. And a lot of people question, why is there 2 police officers to a car stop? You know, does that, sometimes it makes them feel, you know, kind of uneasy as to why there's 2 rather than 1. And there's a really simple answer for that, is usually it's for officer safety. If you look at, you know, the line of duty deaths among officers, a lot of those come from vehicle stops. And so on our campus, where we're not going call to call, we can provide, you know, it's backup for just the other officer. That also adds in another video camera, another audio pack. So that's doing everybody, you know, a justice. So when we're able to have those talks and we're able to just provide those simple answers like that, I think that creates a lot of transparency. and I think that benefits everybody. That benefits the dialogue. And so sometimes we want to be able to give those students those opportunities to ask those questions, whether that's in a larger forum or whether that's interpersonal, between that person and the officer. So having those discussions and being able to be in a position to where you can talk to one another and ask each other questions is beneficial to both of us.
Absolutely.
Well, we wanted to say thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules and on your days off to come and have a conversation with us. So once again, Chief Clark, Officer Morales, and Officer Dorian, we appreciate your time this afternoon. So thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
us.
for having us.
Thank you very much.
All right. So as any other topic that we have on our podcast, we like to also get a student perspective. So joining us up next is Omar Brantley. So he is going to be talking to us just from his perspective. And so we're going to kick it off by first saying welcome to the table.
Yes, thank you.
And we want to give you some rapid fire questions. So really quickly, tell us your major, your academic classification, and where are you from?
So like your year, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. So my name is Omar Brantley. I'm from Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. My major is social work, and this is my third year, but my classification here at Wichita State is a sophomore because I had transferred. So, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So, that this episode is about policing, and so we specifically kind of wanted to talk to you about your experience on campus with police officers and things. So I'm just going to jump right into the deep end here and say, have you ever had a negative experience with a police officer? And if you have, could you maybe tell us about that? Tell us how that made you feel?
Yes, so I have had a negative experience with a police officer before, and I'll probably always remember it. But I remember it was the summer. It was my 5th grade summer, so I was going into 6th grade, and I had these people some of the neighborhood kids that came to my door asked I want to go to the park, and I remember the BET Awards were on, so it was a Sunday, and I was like, I kind of want to stay and watch the BET Awards, but like, no, come to the park. So I was like, okay, I'll go with y'all to the park. So we went to the park, and then another neighborhood kid called one of the other kids that I was with and asked, hey, did Omar slash my brother's tires? And I was like, what? No. And also, I was the only black kid at the park, and so I was the only black kid in this whole situation. And so I said no, then I went back home, and then when I went home, I remember I was in the living room watching the rest of the award show, and then the police came and knocked on the door.
Wow.
And they had knocked on the door, and they were like, are you Omar? And I was like, yes. I was just really confused. And so I asked, could I go get my parents? And so I went to go get my mom and my dad. I was like really shaken up. And so then when I went back downstairs, he had basically said, like, we have eyewitnesses that said they saw you slash, the tires. I was like, what? How? Like, that's impossible because I didn't do it. So I was just like really shaken up. And then I remember him telling me I was in really big trouble, and he put me in the police car. And at this point, like, all the other neighborhood kids were like outside watching, so all the neighborhood kids saw me like being put into the back of this police car. And up to this point, like, I had never even had a detention in school, so like this was my very like first time being in trouble. And I remember they put me in the back of the police car, and he started driving. And I remember I had like innocently asked, like, where am I going? Like, am I going to be in trouble? And he just like chuckled, and then he drove us up to the house. And I remember I was just in the back of the police car for like 30 minutes. And then I remember they opened up the back of the door and said, you can go home with your dad. And there was like no apology. There was like no, this was a mix up. They just said, you're free to go home.
Wow.
So I can imagine that experience, as you recalled it, there's a level of you'll never forget that this happened. Obviously, right? A little bit of trauma behind that as well, or maybe a lot of trauma. And so now, as an individual who's in college, and you think about that experience, and has that experience shaped and or skewed your view on police officers currently? And wait, let me ask this first. Was this police officer of color or not?
He was white.
Okay. So did that experience skew the way in which you view currently white police officers?
It definitely has. Yeah, I would say it has.
Okay. And so when you think about that broadly and you think about stigmas and stereotypes, and obviously we know, even as black males at this table, that one size does not fit all, and one stereotype does not match every single individual. So do you think, thinking from a more societal point of view, do you think that police officers, especially white officers, often get painted with that broad brush of not doing their due diligence and or specifically
Being racist.
being racist? Yeah.
Yeah.
Point blank period. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so basically, like, do I think that they're wrongly stereotyped
Yeah.
in that way? I think this is kind of not tough to answer, but like, so honestly, whenever I answer this question, whenever I just talk about police officers, I can't honestly say that I'm saying it from not a view as, an 11-year-old kid who was
Right.
like,
Sure.
thrown into a back to police car because they were accused of something they didn't do. So like, I think I will always think that there's a negative intent when it comes to police officers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I am curious, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious to hear it from you. I mean, 2 questions. It sounds like the way that you presented that situation, it sounds like it was pretty obviously race influenced. Do you think that it was now? Do you think that that's why they asked you? And the follow-up to that, as an 11-year-old, did you feel that? Did you think they are doing this because I'm the only black kid in the group? Did you feel that at that time?
So at the time I did think that race had to do with it, but like, it really, I think the part that kind of shook me up the most was when I had went upstairs to initially tell my mom and dad that the police officers are outside and like they want me for some reason. I remember I was crying like really bad, and then my dad like gave me his shirt and like wiped my tears and said, just stay strong. And I was like, stay strong? Like, what do you mean? Like, I'm about to like it was like
what's gonna happen? Yeah.
like I was like in my head as an 11-year-old, I'm thinking, oh my God, like I'm about to start this cycle of going in and out of like juvie and jail and stuff.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I remember like my uncles, even my dad, like uncles on both sides, my dad, my brother, like they've all have had like this, run-ins with the police officers. And I remember I would always get kind of praised by other family members because I was like on the right track. I was doing good in school and all these other things. Like I was just a really stand-up kid. And so like when he wiped my tears and said, just stay strong, I was like, oh my God, it's happening. Like it's
This
about
is
to
it.
happen. So yeah.
I can't imagine.
And do you think now, do you feel as if you still maneuver in your everyday life, both on and off this campus, with that heightened sense of awareness of, I have to do the right thing? Are they watching me because I'm black? Do you feel that weight still to this day?
Yeah, still to this day, I feel that.
And do you feel like it's heightened with everything that we've been going through as a people, as a nation, as a country, over the last few years specifically?
Yeah, I definitely think it has heightened, and I definitely think that more younger black kids are more scared because at the time, like kids now, like they have so much more being broadcasted to them. Like they have George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, like all these other things that are just broadcasted to them, along with the other conversations that happen in the black household. So I feel like definitely with this climate, it's heightened for everybody, like times 10.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I saw this picture on Instagram the other day, right? And it was a series of black men, and one, I believe, was about 1 year old, one was about 10, and I think the other one was like 17, and it was the same person as the person had gotten older, and each image was of the person, of this young man, had a white t-shirt on and was smiling in all 3 pictures. And it said, at what point do I become a threat?
Oh,
right? And
wow.
so it was really interesting to me. And it was just something about that was just like really profound to me. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that image, just that imagery was just really powerful for me. So Omar, as an individual who's highly involved and engaged on our campus, tell people some of the things that you do on our campus,
Yeah, I'd
because you
love
do
to
a lot
hear
of
that.
things. So tell them.
So I am a resident assistant for housing, and I work in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion under Danielle Johnson. I am a part of Men of Excellence, which is also out of the ODI. I am now the newly elected president of Black Student Union.
Oh,
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Thank you. And then alongside of Danielle Johnson, I'm a co-founder of a new program called BE, which is BE, and it stands for Black Excellence. And I'm also a part of the SGA and the DEI committee.
Wow.
Yeah, so Omar is very busy on our campus.
Yeah. I'm just going off script here. Could you tell us about what you're co-founding about the B organization? Could you just tell us what that is?
Yes, so this is a program that me and Danielle came up with in a way to kind of not restart or reset, but just like to breathe new life into the Black experience on campus. It started from me researching how HBCUs keep retention on their campus and how they keep their students from coming back. And then we came across Iowa University, or University of Iowa, and they have a program called Young, Gifted, and Black, and that program goes into their dorms, and like there's a section where you can live with people who are also in the program. So we took that and have just brought it here, and like we're just revamping it and giving it our own spin on it.
Wow, that sounds so fascinating.
Yeah, and so my question to you as an individual who's on all areas of this campus, and you're doing a lot of work. We had 3 police officers that work here on campus here earlier, and so my question to you is, as a Black male, do you feel safe on this campus specifically? Why or why not?
I think I'll answer it like this. I do think there's a certain privilege that I have being involved on campus, because when the police interact with me most of the time, they're interacting with me having a housing and residence life badge on.
Sure.
And they're interacting with me in these other spaces, so to speak, versus somebody else who's not involved and can easily be viewed as a bigger threat. So I think I still feel uneasy and unsafe around them, but I know I have basically a safer identity to them, because when they view me as obviously Black, but they see the RA badge and they're like, okay, well, he's an RA. So I hope that answered it.
Yeah, I see what
In
you're
a way.
saying.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that you approach it from that standpoint, because there is a level of capital that you do have on this campus as a Black male who is involved.
Right.
And I think that's always important for people to acknowledge when they understand that they have privilege. And I think a lot of people have a hard time identifying and acknowledging when they do have privilege, because there is privilege in just that alone, even though you're a Black male, but you're an engaged Black male. I'm a Black male on this campus. I'd be foolish to say that I didn't have and don't have more privilege than maybe another Black individual who is not in the position that I'm in.
Right.
So I appreciate, and I thought that was a very, very mature way to answer and approach that question personally. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I do have one more kind of off-script question. Something that I've heard about, and me as a white female has not lived any of this experience, but something that I've heard about is about, you said something earlier about the conversations about race in a Black home. And I'm curious, either before the incident when you were 11 or after or at any time, did you ever have a conversation like that with your parents? Did your parents feel the need to tell you, okay, this is how you act around police officers, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, they might look at you differently? That's just something that's so not in my own life experience. Have you had anything like that?
Yeah, like I was always, from a younger age, just because of just the things that happened like in my family, things like that, I was just always told to watch out and watch my back around police officers and things of that nature. And I think it has a lot to do with like generational stuff.
Sure.
Because I remember my mother and her family, they're very still their father was a police officer,
Oh, okay.
but he was unfortunately murdered on Mother's Day in a motorcycle accident.
Wow.
And the law didn't necessarily have their back in that situation, and like that really traumatized them to the point that they are very uneasy around police officers themselves, and they just always told me to like do whatever you can to have to avoid them and not be around them.
Wow. That's some interesting context. So with the context in which you grew up and the things that you've experienced, we've all seen these national conversations that have been happening over the past year and a half ish. Are you encouraged by those conversations? Do you feel like as a society we're heading in the right direction? How do you feel about the conversations that are going on?
I do think that hearing the conversations and like seeing them, like I can't like, and just seeing everything that's going on, I think they're needed in a way. However, hearing that, I still think to myself sometimes that I am lucky that I'm not one of those stories that are being talked about.
Yeah.
Because it's just very. I feel like Black people can relate to this, like with their run-ins that they've individually had with with police officers. Like hearing that, like even taking it back to Trayvon Martin, like he had Skittles in his hand
Right.
and was walking home. I like Skittles, so I what would happen if I, would have been seen walking home at night? Because there was a gas station at my house too that all the kids would go to at night as well. So it was just hearing these stories. I think it's becoming a bit much for Black people,
Yeah.
because for all these simple things that we're getting killed for, it's just like, wow, that really could have been me. And so I think these conversations are needed, but I don't know. I just feel like the Black community needs something else. I don't know. I think we may be tired of talking.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I'm fascinated by that, and I think that's something that we've heard from several people is
Yeah.
you're tired and you're exhausted. It's every single time you have to have that moment of that could have been me.
Yeah. And I think the reality is that, once again, it could be, and it still can be, right? So I often wonder that what will be the outcome of these conversations. One thing that I'm happy about is that these conversations are no longer being had just at the table of a Black household, right?
Yeah.
These conversations are being had on national TV. These conversations are being had on college campuses. These conversations are being had in courts, right? So I'm happy that these conversations are at least being had, because before we weren't hearing about them unless it was at a dinner table with folks who looked like me. So if there's anything I would at least take away from that is the fact that we are having conversations. Now it's just about having the conversations in a respectful manner,
Yeah.
where people are hearing each other and not talking at each other, right? So I definitely want to say a big thank you to Omar for coming by and sharing his perspective and his experiences, because I think it's really telling, and I know your situation and your experiences. There's a lot of people who can relate. A lot of men who are like you that can relate. So once again, thank you for taking your time to be with us today.
Yeah, we really appreciate your vulnerability and openness with us. That's been our goal with this podcast since the beginning, is to tackle any and all topics, and some of them are easy to talk about and some of them are harder to talk about, but all of them require our guests to have a sense of openness and honesty and willingness to just lay it out there and talk. And so we very much appreciate you coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, also joining us today is Ray McCoy, Airport Police and Fire Officer. Welcome, Officer McCoy, to the podcast.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming on the show today, and we really want your perspective, and we think it's so important as both a police officer and also as a Black man, and we're honored and ready to listen. So I'm curious to just get into it, about how you found harmony in a world where two of your identities are essentially at war. Thinking of, once again, the identity of as Black man and then that of working in law enforcement in any capacity. So Ray, let's start off with you telling us how long you've been doing what you do, and specifically a little bit about your career thus far.
Okay, well, I work at the airport. I've been out there for 15 years. We are one of the 3 departments left in the
I won't say world, but in the country that are dual commission. And we aren't assigned to a specific beat like Wichita Police. And our primary concern is the airport. One of the calls that really sticks out to me the most from my career is the flight safety crash a few years ago. We had an aircraft take off and it hit a building and unfortunately killed 4 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that being on the news, and I remember just kind of what that did to the community. And it was just kind of one of those weird things, is, Wichita aviation, and then having
Right.
something like that was kind of all over the news was kind of a big deal at that moment. How long ago did you say that was?
It was 4 or 5 years ago.
Really? It feels like it was so much longer.
And it could have been, honestly. I've been out there forever. So
Yeah,
it could have been
I'm
longer
just
than that.
saying, time kind of drags, especially coming off the year that we had.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about a lot of that, though, is a lot of our training is for airfield crashes. Like, we're not structured firefighters. I mean, we did fine because some of us do the Wichita Fire Academy, which they don't do that anymore. But it's always like, it lets you know, like, it's an unknown in that job field. It's like, well, it could happen this way, but then it happens the other way.
And Ray, previously, because you have also military background experience
Yes.
as well, so can you just touch on that just a little bit about kind of maybe about your previous time there?
Yeah, I was in the Army for 8 years. I deployed to Iraq in 2004. My first year of marriage, actually. I was gone my first year of marriage to
goodness.
Baghdad. And I guess war is unnatural. That's probably the best way to put it. Like, it looks cool on TV till you're standing in it. So
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
that's one of the best ways to put it. I had issues sleeping when I got home. I still sleep extremely light, but I'm not jumpy anymore.
Yeah, and so the transition from military to working in enforcement, how did you make that transition? And was it easy for you? Was that something that you always planned on doing, is making that transition?
Well, my ultimate goal originally was to become a federal air marshal, and I got into the law enforcement field to go into that. I actually got accepted several years back, but then the government decided to do a hiring freeze. And now the government has like this, well, not now, but they have a cap on your age, and 36 is the age for law enforcement. So I'm too old now.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
And I guess, well, apparently it's because of they force you out at 55. So they figure if you start at like say I start at 40, I won't be able to do a 20-year career.
Gotcha.
Which it doesn't make sense because I mean I'm 40 now and I'm in better shape than most 20-year-olds. So, but that's just how the government works, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess my last question before I let Jessica pick
You're
up
good.
is I often wonder when you think about the career of law enforcement, has the things that you've seen so far in your career, and we had a few officers on earlier in the podcast, but how has the things that you've seen impacted you mentally and emotionally? Like, are you able to detach from the things? And I would imagine that being in the military and having to work on that particular process of detaching, and then going into law enforcement where you also see a lot of crazy things. So what's that process like for you?
Well, one of the toughest things is when you can relate to it personally. It's really easy to get it like say something with a child. That'll always bother me no matter what. But a lot of stuff like shootings and stuff, it's like you get used to it, unfortunately. I mean, but you have to keep the human side of it. I remember I was on a call with EMS, and there was a guy that got shot. It was actually at the barbershop on the north side, and I was talking to another officer, and we were just talking over this guy's body. I mean, he wasn't dead. But then I got back in, and I had like this serious check. I was like, I will never do that again, because it's almost like you get numb to it, and that's
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate part. But I have a serious disconnect from work. Like when I'm at work, I'm there. When I'm at home, I don't think about work at all. And that's how I deal with it. And of course, the military helped, especially with me going overseas and having to deal with that, and then learning what like triggered me as far as like, because I had anger problems when I came home. And you wouldn't know that because you know me, you know how goofy I am. But I had a really short fuse when I got home, and I had to figure out what the problem was. And once I figured that out, then I controlled it just fine.
It seems like that kind of being numb to it, is your brain's way of coping. I mean,
That's exactly what it is,
it's a
yeah.
way of surviving through these things. But it's fascinating that you are recognizing, okay, here's a point to which it's healthy, and then here's a point to which I need to be careful about that and keep the human element.
Yeah, exactly.
So thinking about, you said specifically that the ones that are personal are the hardest, which really leads into our main topic, and why we're so eager to hear from you is that everything that's been going on with racial tension is very personal to you. And of course, we know that tension and racial tension within law enforcement is absolutely not new, but certainly came to a bit of a head in the summer of 2020. So I'm curious just how those events and everything that's happened since then has affected you as an officer and also as a Black man and also as a father of a Black son. What's been going on in your brain for the past year and a half?
I think it's unique being a Black officer because on one hand, you're viewed as a sellout. They look at you like you're selling your race out, which is kind of weird. And I've actually been called it before, but it doesn't bother me. You tend to get thick skin with this job. But I'm a Black male 100% of the time. I'm only an officer when I'm in uniform, and it's super weird when, like, I've been followed around the store, which I don't mind that. I've turned people in for doing that, but I was like, I don't mind if you watch me, but you need to watch everybody,
right?
Because I'm not gonna steal anything, but. And I don't know. I don't get people's logic behind it. I think it's our own biases that we can't get past. But I think it's something that we all need to recognize. Like, we all have biases, and we need to figure out a way to get around it.
Yeah.
And I have talked to my son countless times, and I've told him that if you are stopped, comply, because his safety means more than anything to me. And I said, if you're stopped unjustly, then I will speak to the officer personally. I will handle it. I said, you don't need to handle it. It's my job to handle it. Because mistakes are made. And then we have split-second decisions, and a choice can be made, and something can go bad. You just never know. So I think, ultimately, I want him home, and we'll sort it out later.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I wonder, Ray, and I don't have children, but I wonder when you do your job, right, and when you hear and see the stories and the headlines on the news about, Black males being murdered by white officers, and then you go to work and you have colleagues, right, or you have friends who are white officers. Does that or those conversations or those feelings of how you feel when you're hearing about the news stories just like we are. So as a Black man, that frustration and maybe at some point anger, and then you go into work and or have a conversation or go to lunch with a friend who's a white officer. How do you not carry those feelings over into that world? How do you do that?
I think one of the biggest issues that we as Black males get upset when stuff like that happens is because we can see ourselves in that situation. I have been stopped before. I've been stopped unjustly. and this was before I was an officer, and I've had guns pulled on me for stuff I know that for stuff I didn't do, and so I think that the reason that it irritates us is because we can see ourselves in them. We know that situation could have just as easily gone bad for us like it did for them, and the biggest thing with me is, unfortunately, a lot of times I don't address it at work because I don't feel the white officer can relate to me because they don't face that discrimination that I get when I'm not working. And so a lot of times, and like I have a colleague that he speaks with them. They have debates and stuff, and it's always you can always debate back and forth. But I told him I don't usually speak on it because I don't feel like they can relate because they don't go through it. And that's kind of how I deal with it.
And what has been the response to you from some of those white officers when that is a stance that you take? They're like, okay, I respect that, or kind of what is that? Is it awkward?
No, it's not awkward at all. They respect it. They respect my stance as far as because when I first started, I made it a point to let people know that I don't do race jokes. I don't do religious jokes. It's like, just if you can keep that out of here, or political. I said, if we can keep that out of here, we're best friends. And I try to establish that because I don't care if you're talking about a white guy, I don't care if you're talking about a Black guy, Asian. I don't do the jokes, and I don't think they're funny because I think it kind of plants a seed in your head, and so that's why I tend to stay away from it completely. And they respect it. Like, I work with some really good guys, and my supervisor, he's probably one of the most neutral guys that I've ever met, and he's a white guy, and he trained me when I started, so. And I think he's a good guy.
And another thing, so your son is 15,
Mhm.
right? And I would imagine, as a father, do you ever have fear that your son may also be another headline? Does that ever impact you as a dad?
I constantly think about my son, especially when he's out. That's why we drill in his head, hey, if you're saying you're somewhere, be there. Like, we took him to the gym one day, and my wife just happened to be driving down the street, and he was walking down the street with like 12 other kids, and we didn't even know that he was there. So say something happened, they go, hey, your son's down here. Like, no, my son's at the gym. And so you always have that fear, because you may get the call, well, this group of kids is looking suspicious. They may be up to something, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And suspicion is not a crime, but it can still warrant a police response. And I constantly worry about him but I mean, the good thing is I talk to him like I lost my mom at a really early age. And I remember the stuff that she used to tell me even as a kid. So I try to, I guess, age him beyond his years by talking to him probably more of an adult than a 15-year-old.
Yeah. I could just imagine that the duality and the challenge of separation of both, but at ultimate, like you said, like, you're a father 100% of the time. You're
Right.
a black man 100% of the time, right? And then your job is 40, 60, whatever hours, out of your week. So I can just imagine the constant, the push and the pull of being able to navigate between both worlds. So yeah, that's really, really fascinating for me, and I think probably for our listeners as well.
So what are some of the things that in your job that you love that keep you in your job, and maybe conversely, what are some things that make you go, ugh, why do I do this every day?
I think the biggest thing for most officers is that we don't get into it for recognition. We don't get into it to go, oh, I appreciate you doing that. Like, there's countless times I've bought people food. I've seen homeless people digging in trash and bought them lunch. I don't tell that stuff because I don't have to, because I would hope somebody would do it for me.
Right.
So that's the part that I love, is the fact that I can help people behind the scenes and it goes unrecognized. I don't need the recognition. But one of the things that I won't say bothers me, but is extremely irritating, is the lack of respect for authority. A lot of people, I think it's because we've been cooped up for so long. People are just kind of lost their mind a little bit, and and we've noticed that a lot more. Like, we're getting a lot more calls for police, and we've gotten, like, just a couple days ago, we had a drunk guy that we had to arrest, and he was less than pleasant. And I think a lot of it is just the whole cooped up thing, and then they're kind of like, well, you don't get to tell me what to do because I watched a YouTube video, and I mean, it's nonsense,
Right.
And I think the lack of respect, that kind of is irritating. It's like, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm trying to get this situation figured out. Let's figure it out together, and yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I think the lack of just the lawlessness now that we kind of are kind of operating with,
Yeah.
And it just seems like across the board, crime rates have skyrocketed, especially over the last year, in every shape, way, and form, from murders to domestic violence to, I think I was even hearing, like, overdoses have gone up like crazy,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
as well. And so it's just really scary. Of where the world is now, and not only the world but our own city, and kind of looking, because Ray, you're from Detroit, right?
Yeah, I'm from Detroit. Yeah.
And so I can only imagine, even maybe with some of your upbringing, from personal stories that I've known and I've heard from you, just the amount of things that you've seen in your life. I guess I've never really thought about, from your childhood to your military experience to being in law enforcement, you've seen a lot of things.
Yeah, I have seen a lot.
Wow, I guess I never really thought about it.
And I mean, and again, it goes with, I guess you just figure out how to deal with it. That's kind
Yeah.
of the best way to do it, because if not, a lot of officers kill themselves, a lot of
Yeah.
officers become alcoholics, and you have to get a disconnect. If you don't get a disconnect, you need an out. If you don't have an out, it'll consume you.
That's interesting. I guess thinking about it, right, and a lot of the trauma that is paired with being in law enforcement. And I've heard those statistics before about the high rates of suicide and high rates of alcoholism within law enforcement. I guess I never really thought about it, because you're the only person in law enforcement that I know. But knowing you and knowing how level-headed you are, how calm you are, how relaxed, how fun you are. I guess I never really equated those issues to even someone that I know, you
Right,
know?
right.
And so just kind of hearing you talk about it and just me being a little bit more reflective, it's just really, it seems like it could be overwhelming at times.
Oh, it can be at times because I mean, there's so much stuff happening at once sometimes that you have to make split second decisions, and it could be the wrong or right decision, but
Right.
you got to make some kind of choice.
Right.
So
And I think it's easy to have a judgment, right? But I
Yes.
could not imagine being in a moment where you literally have 2 seconds to make a decision.
Absolutely.
The adrenaline, I don't know what's on the other side, I don't know what's coming, and just that fear, right? And I don't know what I would do in some of those situations. But then on the flip side, it's very easy to judge someone who you feel didn't make a good decision in that moment,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so I think one thing that I would hope that we would also get to a place is grace and compassion and understanding, right? And I think sometimes I think things would look and feel a lot differently if we as a society navigated that way. Ray, one of the things that I think is interesting, and we've heard a lot about racial profiling, and that's been a topic of conversation for many, many years. And so my question to you is, do you think racial profiling exists? Is it a thing? And then how does that impact your life and your profession? So what is your take on that?
I unfortunately do believe that profiling exists, just mainly because there's no way to prove that it doesn't. You can say that you didn't stop a guy based off his race. You can say you didn't stop somebody based off of what they, where they came from or what religion they practice, but you can always lie. So that's why I believe it exists. And the FBI has said for years that extremist groups have infiltrated law enforcement and the military. So if you already have a bias enough to be an extremist group, what's stopping you from doing a racial bias or racial profiling on somebody
Right.
to pull them over? And so I do believe it exists. I've never personally witnessed it myself. I've never heard an officer use a derogatory term towards another race. I've never had it happen in my career. I'm not saying it doesn't happen because I'm sure it does. Because there's officers that get busted all the time for sending racist text and saying certain things on video. But I think, and a lot of us have biases, and I think you just have to make a conscious effort not to rely off of that, because it's going to get you in, well, for one, it's going to get you in trouble, and it's not ethical. And I think one of the things is too, though, one issue that we have is that if your only encounters with law enforcement are negative, then you're going to tend to think every officer is bad. If your only encounters with a certain group is negative, you're going to think, okay, well, this race is this way. And so that's why you have to make a conscious effort not to have a bias. And I believe in showing up completely neutral and figuring it out. I don't, because I've been lied to before. I've been lied to so many times. At one point, I thought everybody was lying to me. And so you have to get past that. Go, okay, what do I have now? Let's figure it out.
That's hard, but I do get it, right? I teach a diversity class, and sometimes being in that room and talking about these really controversial topics at times and hearing different folks give their viewpoint based off of their own experience, but me making sure I don't judge them based off of their ignorance and or lack of experience. And I can only imagine, and that's in a classroom setting, right? I mean, so it's very different, right? And then I can only think about it where you're in a field where that bias can impact someone's life.
Exactly.
Like
Very
they could go to
literally.
jail. They can, like this can possibly, depending on what happens, they could lose their job. I mean, like there's so many things at stake that are very crucial to this person's life and the people that they love. So I can only imagine how those biases show up, and then ultimately what the outcome is of you feeding into that bias that you have. So yeah, that's really interesting as well.
And I've even seen people try to use it as, oh, well, you're only here because of this. Like, no, that's not why I'm here. I'm here because you were over here acting an idiot. They call me. I'm not here because you're a black dude. I'm here because I'm just as black as you. So that's not why I'm over here. I'm over here because you were acting a certain way, and this is why I'm here, and this is why we're talking. Anytime I'm talking to you, it's because of an issue that you created, not something that I created. So.
That's a good point.
Do you ever, you mentioned earlier how sometimes people think of you as like you said, like selling out your race or whatever. Do you ever get the opposite of that, where you get the opportunity to sort of feel like a bridge? Do you ever feel like that happens?
Yeah, I've had it happen before, because there's calls that I've had that my background, I guess, helps as far as like establishing a connection. I've been on calls where the guys were extremely hostile to the white officers, and they talk to me. So it just depends. It honestly depends on the situation. But I believe minority officers, period, are crucial, and we need more. We don't have a whole lot. I mean, I guess it's getting better now, but I think that it's crucial, and you have to get beyond the thinking of you can't let how somebody else feels about you determine what you want to do. Because I have a plan for retirement. Do you have? I mean, that's how I look at it. It's like I have a plan for retirement. I have this amount of money saved up. I'm into the stock market with the city. So it's like, what is your plan? Right. But you're too busy looking at me crazy because you don't like my job, and that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I even had a situation where a guy, I don't hardly ever see him anymore, but I was working at the movie theater doing security, and I would see this guy at the gym every day, and he would always speak to me, but he just happened to see me in uniform, black male, and all of a sudden now he's got a problem. Like, he was not necessarily saying anything, but just kind of looking at me a certain way. Yeah. And I'm just like, okay, well, what is your plan? Like, this is my job. This is not who I am as a person. Mm-hmm. So, wow, that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, well, okay, well, what are you doing with your life?
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's super weird. It's like I used to take offense to that stuff, but I really had to work at it. Like, look, this is my job right now. Now, when I go home, you wouldn't even be able to tell what I do. Yeah. So
I need your sense of self. I'm just so in awe. So where do you see your path in your career going, and law enforcement as a whole? Do you see changes happening from all of this, unrest and uprising and everything? What do you anticipate for the future and the relationship specifically between, law enforcement and minorities?
I hope that cooler heads can prevail. We need leaders on both sides. Now, it's our right as Americans to protest. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing more American than that. But we need cooler heads to prevail. You can't show up with a preconceived notion of what you're going to get out of it. I think that if we're going to have a sit down and we're going to talk, it needs to be a serious talk. Not the used car salesman talk around the issue thing. Just address what the problem is with the communities. And we need some community leaders to try to help fix it. Yeah. Because there's this thing on the street. Well, you don't tell on anybody. Well, okay. Well, when it affects you directly, you should. And it shouldn't matter if it affects you directly, but I don't know what the whole culture thing is. Well, you don't tell. Yeah. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I hope that we can establish some type of relationship with the community, and it works out. I mean, I have high hopes for it, and hopefully it come to pass.
And that's tough. That's really, really tough, because that takes a lot of work, a lot of understanding, a lot of conversation, a lot of healing, and a lot of people to come to the table, and to put their own emotions aside, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about race, that is a topic. Race, politics, religion. A lot of those things that are hitting those notes of diversity, right? Nerves, it's hard for people to separate and take out emotion, right? And I think that is going to be the challenging thing. And in my opinion, I felt like COVID has even exacerbated some of those things, right? Because you're seeing those disparities between certain groups of folks, and then you also get to a point where people are like, well, I'm tired of things always being about race, right? So it's challenging, and I truly hope that going forward as well, that we're able to find some common ground between our law enforcement and our community and our youth specifically, right? And what that looks like. So yeah, that's interesting. Huh. I have one really quick thing. How do you feel about body cams?
Ooh, I think they're great. Because I always tell guys, if you're doing your job, as long as you're doing your job, you can't go wrong. And that's what I tell every new guy that I ever come in contact with. And so I think they're great. because especially when they're used correctly. I mean, you can't do something and then turn it on later, and that happens, unfortunately. So I think they're great because a lot of times I've been lied on, and it usually works out better for the officers. Like, okay, well, you said what? And then they calm down once you turn the camera on. It's like, no, say it again.
Right.
So we can get it on camera. And then I'm like, no, well, I'm just saying, they won't repeat it. So I think they're great. I think they're great when they're used correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
I
a great point.
never asked you that. Well, definitely, Ray, I want to say thank you for being so willing to be real with us and get into this challenging topic. We definitely appreciate everything that you do in the community, and we're so thankful to have your voice on our show. So once again, thanks for coming and talking with us today.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
you.